Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Fynn Leitch. I'm the curator here. I'm of settler descent, and my family moved to the shores of Georgian Bay, just north of Shawniga, in a small town called Pointe-a-Barrel in the 1940s. I came to Nogojiwanong in 2009, and I want to begin by acknowledging that the Art Gallery of Peterborough is located on the Treaty 20 Miskowiec territory and in the traditional territory of the Miskowiec and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaty First Nations, which include Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Alderville, Scugog Island, Rama, Beausoleil, and Georgina Island First Nations. We respectfully acknowledge that the Williams Treaty's First Nations are the stewards and caretakers of these lands and waters in perpetuity, and that they continue to maintain this responsibility to ensure their health and integrity for generations to come. I've been spending time with a piece of writing by Leanne Berasamoseke Simpson, an off-reserve member of Alderville First Nations, called Land as Pedagogy, Anishinaabe Intelligence and Rebellious Transformation, which was published in 2014. It begins with the story of Kwezens, a young woman walking in the bush in early spring, learning of the sweetness of maple water by watching a red squirrel. The work shares the importance of a different kind of learning, certainly different from what we're about to engage in here. It's speaking to an embodied, experience-based learning, one that is slow and engaged, one that requires openness and patience and respect, one that requires community. Leanne shared why she loves this story. Quote, "At every turn, Kwezens is met with the very basic core Anishinaabe values: love, compassion, and understanding. She centers her day around her own freedom and joy. I imagine myself at 7, running through a stand of maples with the first warmth of spring, marking my cheeks with warmth. I imagine everything good in the world. My heart, my mind, my spirit are open and engaged, and I feel as if I could accomplish anything. I imagine myself grasping at feelings I haven't felt before, that maybe life is so good that it is too short, that there really isn't enough time to love everything." This is not the story of maple tapping that Leanne or many kids get. She recounts a 3rd grade school visit to the sugar bush, the teacher showing us 2 methods of making syrup: the pioneer method, which involved a black pot over an open fire and clean sap, and the Indian method, which involved a hollowed out log in an unlit fire with large rocks in the log to heat the sap up. Sap, which had bark, insects, dirt, and scum over it. The teacher asked us which method we would use. Being the only native kid in the class, I was the only one that chose the Indian method. Anishinaabe systems of learning and teaching are decentralized. Learner-led lessons arise as they are offered. Understanding takes lived, embodied experience and multiple perspectives. Leanne writes, "Anishinaabe intelligence is not an individual's property to own. Once an individual has carried a particular teaching around to the point where they can easily embody that teaching, they then also become responsible for sharing it. Individual-generated meaning is an authentic and grounded power. These meanings in all their diversity then become the foundation of generated collective meanings and a plurality of truth. The collective process, operationalized within Anishinaabe political traditions, for example, generates a series of collective meanings, including dissension." So what Leanne's asserting here is that all our voices are important, and it is important that we speak to and share from our own lived experiences, and that we hold space for and learn from each other's. Leanne writes, "The task of decolonial artists, scholars, and activists is not simply to offer amendments or edits to the current world, but to display the mutual sacrifice and relationality needed to sabotage colonial systems of thought and power for the purpose of liberatory alternatives." In today's talk, which, as you know, is not a tour, in the traditional sense, perhaps, I'm going to focus on stories from my own life and the life of the Art Gallery of Peterborough. Admittedly, there are some academics mixed in, and I'm going to try to speak from the heart and to embodied learning as much as possible. In the exhibition text for Offering, a permanent collection show presented in the late summer and early fall of 2020 here, I wrote about a children's book, or rather, my memory of a children's book. I love kids' books, they're my favorite, those and rocks. I wrote about Lillian and Russell Hoban's 1964 book, Nothing to Do. It's from their series focused on Frances Opossum, a series my mother would read to me. In this one, Frances is bored and complaining. Her mother gives her a stone, a something-to-do stone, an object to keep close, to spark imagination, or center on for meditation. The book is out of print and hard to find, and my copy is currently somewhere in the things at my parents' house, and I haven't held it in years. But in my memory, though I cannot verify this, the stone opened up worlds within worlds. Tossed, it would land and create a place of focus, acting as a landmark wherever it settled. Peering close, a drama revealed itself, industrious ants, carnivorous and mysterious cracks, constellations of debris, a point on a fractal as big as the universe. In the comfort of this smaller matryoshka doll within a set of nesting dolls, Frances was no longer bored. This talk, I hope, reflects a number of stones tossed, or perhaps just one good one skipped along a water's surface, a series of reflections, engagements, and explorations. This is the Art Gallery of Peterborough's 50th year. A milestone such as this, of course, has us looking back into our archives, thinking about where we've come from, how we've sustained, the work we've done along the way, and where we're going. When I thought about this, I just couldn't get the word ghost out of my head. How many of you were at the opening? Okay, not the most. Okay, great, because you're gonna hear a few things that I shared before. So, you guys can bear with me. I appreciate your patience. This juried show began as ideas around our 50th anniversary solidified, and a memory of a component of an artwork that had somehow lived in my head for 6 years. 6 years ago, I was in Spencer J. Harrison's studio, and he showed me a tile of plastic, vacuum formed over mittens his mother wasn't able to finish before her death. I cried. What he hadn't known at the time is that my own grandmother, who had passed 6 years before the moment when I stood in his studio, also had unfinished mittens. They were for my cousin Alicia, and as the resident next generation knitter in the family, I was given the task of finishing them, but I couldn't. My tension was off. The rate at which yarn slips through each knitter's fingers is unique, and so my stitches didn't match, which brought grief. I brought them with me. This is a photo of my mother and my mother's mother, Mabel, the knitter. I love this photo. It's from before I was born. I know versions of these people, right? I imagine this moment, the sounds of the motor, the splashes of the sweet water of Georgian Bay, the chill in their bodies, smell of the towels, their laughter. Is my dad driving? I can only guess. I think I'm right, but I'm not sure, and they're not sure either. The things that are left behind, what we choose to keep, how we choose to archive, what we carry with us, all of these things say a lot about us as individuals and as communities. And I think about these things when I think about the 50th anniversary, when I look at old photographs and letter traces of the history of this institution, one that has been engaged with the work of living artists since its inception. There are ghosts of past exhibitions in here, conversations from openings, talks, summer camps. These things have resonance. So I built a call, and an incredible 140 artists applied, bringing forward wonderful, thoughtful, remarkable works. Our jurors, Jess Sash, Clayton Windat, and Kelly Egan, had quite the task laid out before them. And in the submissions, we found thematic echoes and resonances. There is grief and love and struggle and rage in this building, softness and power, gentleness and strength. They left an incredible list of 55 artists with me, and Seams and Strata was formed from that. This is a painting by Pierre Christensen. It's hanging in the lower ramps right before you enter this space. And this is a photograph from the opening of Silent Ice, Deep Patience by Dorothy Caldwell, which showed here from March 21st to June 22nd, 2014. My first day of work here was just 2 weeks after that. I remember attending that opening. I was walking down the ramps and I was passed by a speechless and teary Brad Copping. I would work with him later to present Setting Afloat on a River in Spate, which featured this work, Confluence. Shaped like an X and constructed of two fused canoes, it rests on four precise points, tipped as if in temporary storage. It is angled so that it can be walked around and through, revealing its construction. The X is a recurring icon throughout Copping's practice, shorthand for place marking and intersection. This simple character invokes connection, presence, and location. During an interview I commissioned between Spencer J. Harrison and Copping, he remembered an earlier show of work by Dorothy Caldwell at the AGP, which included this work, Polestar. It was made in 1996 of discharged cotton, paint, and thread, and it now lives in the collection of the Cambridge Art Galleries or Idea Exchange, a purchase made with the assistance of the Walter and Duncan Gordon Charitable Foundation and the Starry Starry Night Committee. Copping recounted, "It dominated the north wall, and I remember being overwhelmed by that piece, that I wanted to somehow live with it. That work is lodged in my head. He wonders if Confluence came from that." I made a 10 by 10 for a past It's All About Art fundraiser when I was still new to town and just a little baby arts administrator, just a month or so into working at ArtSpace. I needed a cozy for the frame. Dorothy Caldwell picked it. It is one of the most important moments of validation in my art career. This thing that was made by my hands was chosen to be held by hers. This room, this building, this land holds traces of the things that happened here. These are captured in photographs, guest books, contracts, promotional ephemera, and perhaps most importantly, in the memories of those who were there, and the way that those memories were translated into stories, shared in other rooms, and implanted into the memories of those who weren't. This is an artwork by Fiona Krangle. Hi. It is called Artifacts Held, and it is installed to my right. I first met Fiona Krangle through Presently. Presently, for those who remember, was a juried exhibition, our first since 2012. It was a reaction to gaps in programming from pandemic rescheduling, and it opened in November 26, 2020. It too was an incredible show, 64 artists. 2 large-scale portraits by Fiona hung to the wall, right over there. I didn't get to meet everyone in that show, given the lockdowns and the nature of the exhibition, but I did meet Fiona, and we kept in conversation. She studied under Tim Whiten, whose incredible work was in this space in an award-winning Elemental Earthen until May 21st, 2023. When our call went out asking artists to submit original works of art that resonate with the theme of legacy, archives, nostalgia, ghosts, memory, survival, and growth, Fiona knew she had just the thing. Within her recent past, Fiona had lost both her parents within 5 months of each other. She was tasked with cleaning out their house, which she did for the better part of the summer of 2023, deciding what to keep and what to discard, assessing value and creating a cache of their lives. She writes, "The telling of their story, the construction of our shared history, is in the archiving of small ephemeral items where the residual traces of their gestures can still be found." In The Underpainter, Jane Urquhart, incidentally married to Tony Urquhart, whose work we hold in our collection, who visited with their son Aidan on the occasion of the closing of his exhibition, New Canadian Cabins, back in 2017, wrote, "Art is a kind of mining. The artist is a variety of prospector, searching for the sparkling silver of meaning in the earth." Fiona's process of sifting through her parents' things was steeped in a complex network of emotions and memory and duty, and it involved for Fiona touching everything they had touched, physically connecting with each object, an intimate and sensorial moment. This is First Attempt and Another Struggle by Miguel Arturino Hernandez. These are paintings of clay, worked by the artist's hands as he processed feelings of uncertainty and frustration felt during his experience of immigration from Venezuela to Canada, a document of the results of a haptic expression. We can only imagine how the clay felt, the connection of the muscles of his hands to the thoughts of his head and the feelings of his heart, how it must have felt to spend different time with the resulting forms, reinterpreting them through different gestures of hand on brush, in paint, on panel. Krangle photographed her hand holding each object, laid a piece of mylar over top, a filter of sorts. On top of that, she carefully painted each object, retaining the dents and scuffs and dirt, the patina of their lives lived with her parents. Monica McTighe's Framed Spaces, Photography and Memory in Contemporary Installation Art begins with the problem of installations' typically temporary nature, reflecting on how these works have been and might be preserved and considered by future artists, critics, curators, and art historians. While experience might be held up as the defining character of installation art, few people have had the opportunity to walk through celebrated installation pieces from the past. Instead, installation art of the past is known through archival photographs that limit, define, and frame the experience of the viewer. She writes, although installation art is often assumed to be an art of direct experience, it is often mediated by photography. If installation art requires the presence of a viewer, what does it mean when the majority of viewers only see them in photographs? As scholars have found, the history of ephemeral art objects and events, such as installation art, is filtered through the memories of the people who saw it firsthand. These memories are often solidified or distorted by the documentation that is then published alongside the work. Photographs mediate memory. History is a representation, often constructed from these bits of evidence. These fragments of the work of art may then end up in a textbook via the circuitous routes of memory, word of mouth, art review, brief catalog description. A few photographs and videotapes of these events are often embroidered by memory, which in an art history lecture hall is provided with a distilled and perhaps distorted verbal description with a single photograph of an entire installation. In a talk like this, the image comes to stand in for the work in a way the artist never intended. Photographs both solve and create problems when we are trying to understand the past. This is an image from the opening reception for a solo exhibition of work by Eric Loder. Some of these works from this show are now in the AGP's permanent collection, one of which is hanging on the walls right now, upstairs in the upper ramp. And we just shared it yesterday on our social media as a part of our regular collection posts. And this is an image from Jean Nin's exhibition in 1981. Works from this exhibition are in our collection too. And we have those ephemeral tracings, old newsletters and annual reports, guest books, catalogs, in some cases, files with agreements. And those ones, with the two-dimensional wall works, these are the easy ones. This is the catalog from Nobu Kubota's exhibition. It was the first one I ever saw here. There was a sculpture by Jimson Bowler on the main landing, and this wonderful sensorial experience here in the main gallery. Projections danced across flowing ribs of wood. This is what it looked like in Kelowna. The catalog is good, but it cannot capture what it felt like to be here. The lighting, the sound, the relationship of my body to the work. Okay, if you will, please permit me a little interlude of theory by way of more Monica McTighe, Walter Benjamin, Marcel Proust, René Green, and Michel Foucault. McTighe posits installation art and photography often overlap in the practice of archiving and collecting, which has increasingly been used by artists in the questioning of memory and history in the contemporary art practice in the last 30 years. McTighe notes, Walter Benjamin's essays describe the way that experience has changed in modernity with the increased ability to reproduce images by examining how these forms of memory have been conditioned by these new technologies, specifically photography. The change is reflected in the duality of memory that he describes as the decline of the aura. The photograph removes distance. We can get close to that photograph in ways we couldn't with something that perhaps no longer exists or exists in a faraway location with an expensive plane ride maybe. But what is lost? He writes, an air clings to the unique, handmade object bound to a particular place and time. These objects have lived a history that their contemporary viewers have not, and they bear the marks of that history in their material form. These sensorial perceptions can imprint on the brain and can also be triggered by involuntary memory. The photograph, he would argue, can only operate to support voluntary memory, the work of deliberately trying to recall. For Marcel Proust, involuntary memory is memory that occurs when cues are encountered in everyday life and evoke recollections of the past without conscious effort, like the memories of his childhood being conjured by dunking madeleines in tea. It is the experience that recalls those embedded memories, the smell, the taste, the feeling, along with the visual. Quote, "The photograph is flat and thin, reducing experience to a set of visual information locked in a frame. Memory as photographic reproduction and archival materials, in repressing certain kinds of sensual information, marks the stark divide between the past and the present, between memory that consists of visual data and memory that engages more of the senses. The transformation of memory practices generated both excitement and crisis." We're going to look at one piece of artwork that really engages with this, and that is Renee Green's Partially Buried in Three Parts. And in order to do that, we're going to understand Robert Smithson's concepts of sight and non-sight and the connection to history and memory through photographs and objects. So we're going to begin with Smithson. This is him, Robert Smithson. Robert Smithson is well known for his earthworks and perhaps most recognizably for Spiral Jetty, which you can still visit today in a ticketed park. Smithson was invited to make a work of art at Kent State University. It's different than this one. And continuing his interest in making sculpture with earth and engaging with art as something that changes over time, he said he'd always wanted to bury a building. So, in 1970, along with the help of the faculty and students, they rented a backhoe and dumped 20 truckloads of earth on an old woodshed until its center beam broke. Interested in the role of time and organic processes in art, Smithson anticipated the work's progressive decay. The natural life of the work, however, was interrupted. On May 4th, 1970, 4 students were killed and 9 wounded by the National Guardsmen during a Vietnam War protest. And soon after, the words May 4th, Kent 70 were painted onto partially buried woodshed, and the work became a memorial to the tragic event. It was subject to arson in 1975, and as plans for preserving the work were debated, the woodshed continued to fall apart, and in 1984, the site was anonymously cleared. The only record of the work today is a single photograph. We've got the foundation and an installed plaque and Smithson's sketch. The events surrounding the work propelled it into fame. So we've got Smithson's concept sketch, we've got the plaque, and then the photograph with Renee Green's fingers. So this is a POV shot of Renee Green looking at the photo. Renee Green used the medium of film with its capacity to capture time and produce multiple image juxtapositions in a manner that conjures the operation of memory, to explore not only the history itself of partially buried woodshed, but also the processes by which we strive to interpret the past. There is a bank of video monitors. On one, we see Green flipping through a book with the photographs of Robert Smithson's site-specific work, Partially Buried Woodshed of 1970, which was destroyed and remains decayed into the earth at Kent State University decades ago. The images in the books are one way for Green, who was a young child when the woodshed was made, to access that moment in history. McTighe writes, in her work, Partially Buried in Three Parts, Green avails herself also of the personal memories of herself and others, as well as artifacts, television reports, and books to uncover a network of associations and connections threaded through Smithson's 1970 piece. In the process, Green reveals this moment in history to be a complex of overlapping events, memories, and experiences that connect her personally to the history of the year 1970 and to Smithson's woodshed. Here, we are seeing the unfolding of Green's experience of Smithson's work. There are a series of displacements here, right? Our experience of this room right now is a single documentation photo of the installation, picked by me, grounded with some writing. There's a first-person viewer in there that we can see, and we can maybe imagine their experience, but they are experiencing a displaced and presented version put together by Green. And Green, of course, is engaging with her own experience of the memories of documentations of a work which she never saw. Returning to the AGP, I wonder how the work that I do and Briar and Zach and everyone, might affect the way that things are perceived by future generations. This is a photograph from the recent installation by Jose Luis Torres, The Everyday Future, which was developed and toured by the University of Lethbridge Art Gallery, curated by Josephine Mills. It occupied this space in a site-specific installation from October 29th, 2022 to January 8th, 2023. The work was comprised of a deconstructed camper van, found materials including a series of doors decommissioned from the University of Lethbridge's theater department, who had accumulated them in various ways over decades and used them for various productions, 2x4s, and a few purchases from secondhand stores, including the Vinnie's and the Restore here in town. Artist Garrett Gilbert, whose piece is in the ramps right now, loaned us 2 large metal barrels for the occasion. After the installation here, items were redonated or taken to the dump. McTighe talks about the photograph as something that frames a part of the visual world, becoming a physical and mobile thing, allowing it to become recontextualized, discursive. The photograph is a mediator of history and experience. It seizes and holds time, disrupting its flow, materialized in a frozen object form. Here, we see the artist and a visitor. They're speaking Spanish, the artist's mother tongue. They're having a private moment, one that I've somehow come to know and love a version of through an imagined interaction flowing out from this still that lives in my mind. They are happy, and so am I. Michel Foucault, thinking about the materialization of memory, wrote, "The storage of data in the memory of a machine, the circulation of discrete elements within a random output, car traffic, the sounds on a telephone line, the identity of marked or coded elements inside a set may be randomly distributed or may be arranged according to single or multiple classifications. Within these sites, there are relations that can be figured in visual terms." Here, he begins to utilize the term heterotopias, sites marked off from society that are paradoxically connected to all other sites in society. They open out as well as into other times. Examples include the library, the museum, the cemetery, the cinema, this place. David Yu utilizes Michel Foucault's concept of heterotopias in his work, using elements of social experimentation to open worlds and create reaction through carefully planned, unexpected situations. Ultimately, David aims for a blurring between a constructed situation and a real situation, often attempting to coerce viewers into performance, integrating themselves with the experience of the artwork. In an artist talk with the AGP in 2020 held over Zoom, David discussed his work from 2015 called Boop, which you're seeing here. It was a long structure installed at the front of a gallery made out of wooden table legs. It was installed close to and spanning the entire entrance so that when people first entered the gallery, they encountered this large barrier preventing them from accessing the rest of the work in the space. They'd have to bow to it and cross under it to see the rest of the space. If someone were to bump into it, it would collapse, which of course happened. The work is then left like that, a big spectacular crash, a moment of crisis. Everyone would gasp. David said, "I tend to work in these types of antagonistic ways to elicit a more visceral relationship with the viewer to the work. Now you have to physically navigate a structure in order to engage at all. And with it right at the door, there's no way to not." Quote, "There's a sort of playful shift that happens to me. It's a bit about preciousness, and it's a little bit about that level of carefulness that you often enter a gallery space with, which we're very thankful that you do. That whole notion of you can't touch the work, you can't get close to it, and what happened during the show, which was really amazing, was that the stage flipped and everyone sort of stood at the back of the gallery and watched the front door to see how the people would react to the sculpture. And so then that was actually quite exciting because then it really did turn out that each and every person that entered was a performer." X in Waiting was an ongoing performance-to-camera series created during quarantine, also by David Yu. A component of this series was first physically exhibited in Presently, right there. And then later represented in partnership with the London Ontario Media Arts Association in a festival and digital exhibition. the photograph on, and I get these things wrong, sorry. Your left, is that right? Is, okay, I'm really bad at that. The photograph over there is the thing, right? The photo on the left, yeah, is from the installation at the Art Gallery of Peterborough. X in waiting refers to the period of spaces that occurs for something to become something else. Here, the X is the variable, and it stands in for whatever the occupation is that the artist is consumed with during that period of waiting. And X, of course, also evokes uncertainty, which we all felt during the early days of the pandemic. These durational performances were created with the camera as the primary audience, creating videos as the artist stayed in a position of stasis for 8 minutes each. Along with each of the installed elements, there was a QR code, a portal to that related video. The audience was invited to watch, placing themselves into a similar stasis, a displaced collaborator, an audience, and a participant. Imagine yourself for 8 minutes watching this video. Suspense perhaps, but no dramatic arc. How often do you check the progress bar, shift your weight, decide to stop? How comfortable is your body as it feels the passage of time? Do you notice your breath, the beat of your heart? I start to think about John Cage's 4 minutes and 33 seconds, a musical composition of nothing and everything. In performance, the expectation of the audience inverts as the musician dutifully does nothing. And then everything happens. The orchestra is revealed to be the rustle of a pant leg, the electrical whir of the ventilation system, a cough, 4 rows down and 5 seats to your right. This takes the passage of time. It takes waiting and boredom and emptying before filling. This is Justin Mezzapelli's Give Me This Day, My Daily Bread. It is a meditation on time, its passing, and the race against expiry. It first showed at the Robert McLaughlin Gallery, curated by Hannah Keating. Hannah, who helped to install multiple exhibitions in here, and is the daughter of our current board president. It is made of 365 bread tags, organized by date, January 1st in series through December 31st. A collection such as this takes time to amass. It comes from a place of curiosity and delight, an understanding of the potential poetry in the everyday object. This work makes me think of the jars of Pop Tads saved for donation in my grandmother's kitchen windowsill. There's potential in nostalgia, a hope for something better, but there's danger too, right? For what are we nostalgic? Jeffrey Macklin's Collective Effervescence red cap uses the aesthetic of the MAGA hat and replaces it with the text collective effervescence, a phrase that for Macklin has the potential to become an important piece of arsenal in representation of his community and others who work for better. It represents love and support for a collective and inclusive good. There is tremendous power in the practice of archiving. This is a still from Anshul Roy's Rage Against the Archive. Roy is an artist from Ahmedabad, India, currently pursuing his MFA in photography at Syracuse University. In this video, which is playing on a loop on the screen, right over there, Roy is using his browser's inspect element, a feature as an act of electronic civil disobedience to alter the underlying code of the New York Public Library's website and their digitized copy, The People of India. The book, The People of India, was originally published between 1868 and 75. It is one of the world's oldest and most comprehensive ethnographic publications, commissioned by the British colonial government in India after the 1857 First War of Independence. After having experienced violent uprisings and their first direct challenge to colonial rule, the British government was keen to understand the tribes and their cultures, to rule them better and prevent future rebellions. The camera, masquerading as an objective device, was employed as an imperial tool by the colonial government to document the people, othering them in this process. Dehumanizing ethnographic photographs were made with an agenda to push forward a pseudo-scientific theory about the racial, economic, and cultural inferiority of Indians to justify colonial rule. How do these problematic images from the past exist in contemporary institutional archives? The New York Public Library digitized the book. It provides the public with free access to the images, and they also sell these images as fine art prints in various sizes and options. The video shows a disembodied cursor frantically deleting traumatic archival photos and inserting texts on the website that subvert the colonial ideology and the fixity of memory present in the archive. Rage Against the Archive browser plugin, also by Roy, shows the working of a Google Chrome browser extension that Roy made, which works on the New York Public Library's digital archives and replaces the buy as fine art print option with an error message as an act of resistance. Juried shows come in many forms. The ones we've presented in our recent past, presently, and scenes in Strata are built from a vaguely themed call, an abstract prompt perhaps, asking artists to respond and share their work. Then it's about the jury, a really good and thoughtful jury, interested and supportive, willing to disagree and discuss. The prompt is mine, but it's just as up to them as it is to the artist to interpret the call. I said I couldn't get ghosts out of my head when I was building this call, and when I sat down to write, I couldn't get the universe out of it. On December 12th, 2012, NASA released an image of the infant universe created from data gathered over 9 years by orbiting spacecraft designed to measure temperature fluctuations. This image depicts the entire sky flattened into an oval as it appeared over 13 billion years ago, a colorful map of ancient light. It looks like some sort of tumbled gemstone to me, a dark opal with smoldering specks of yellow and red. 15 months later, a new image of the infant universe was released, composed of even more detailed data gathered by the European Space Agency Planck satellite. These might be the most expensive baby photos ever. They are a product of the work we do to look back to better understand where we are and where we're headed. There are so many more wonderful works in this show, so many more wonderful places to toss and settle a stone. Thank you for spending some time with me.